Imagine a place where dreams were built not on privilege, but on determination, courage, and the unyielding belief in a better future. After the Civil War, countless black families faced a world that offered little safety and fewer opportunities. The promise of freedom had been won, but the reality was harsh. Segregation, violence, and systemic discrimination shadowed every step. Yet, rather than surrendering to despair, these families looked westward, to the open lands of Oklahoma, envisioning a community where they could live, work, and thrive on their own terms. In Tulsa, a neighborhood began to take shape, a place that would later be known as Greenwood. This was not just a cluster of houses and shops. It was a community built from the ground up, brick by brick, dream by dream. Families pooled their resources, bought land, opened schools, and founded businesses. They created spaces where children could learn safely, where neighbors could support each other, and where economic independence was not a distant hope but a lived reality. Churches served as gathering places and centers for guidance, while local entrepreneurs, barbers, grocers, doctors, lawyers ensured that money and opportunity stayed within the community. Every purchase, every job, every achievement reinforced a sense of pride and resilience that could be felt on every street corner. Greenwood was not just a place. It was a testament to what could be achieved when a community believed in itself. For a time, it flourished like few black neighborhoods could in early 20th century America. Children attended schools led by dedicated teachers. Families celebrated milestones together, and the streets buzzed with the energy of people determined to carve out a life on their own terms. It was a rare and shining example of black prosperity and self-determination, a place that would later earn the name Black Wall Street. But as we explore this remarkable story, it is not only about the success, but about resilience, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of a community determined to thrive in the face of systemic challenges. The history of Greenwood reminds us that triumph can exist even under oppression, and that the strength of a people is measured not just by what they build, but by how they stand together when faced with threats. If you are fascinated by stories of courage, community, and history that has been hidden for too long, you are in the right place. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to uncover more powerful stories that inspire, educate, and remind us why remembering the past is so important. Stay tuned, because the journey into Greenwood's history is just beginning, and what you are about to discover will stay with you long after the video ends. As Greenwood grew, it became far more than just a neighborhood. It evolved into a vibrant ecosystem of black achievement and communal pride that few could rival anywhere in the United States at that time. Walking through its streets, one could sense the rhythm of a self-sustaining community, each corner humming with the energy of enterprise and ambition. Over 300 black-owned businesses flourished here, ranging from barber shops and grocery stores to law offices and medical practices, all thriving under the careful stewardship of those who had built them from the ground up. Every storefront and every service was a testament to ingenuity and perseverance, reflecting a deep understanding that economic independence was not merely about accumulating wealth, but about creating stability, dignity, and opportunity for generations to come. The schools in Greenwood played a critical role in this communal fabric. Children attended classrooms led by passionate educators who, despite limited resources, worked tirelessly to provide knowledge, skills, and a sense of purpose. Parents scrimped and saved to ensure that their children could have books, uniforms, and the chance to pursue higher education, understanding that education was not a privilege to be taken lightly, but a tool to secure a future that had been denied to their parents and grandparents. The schools were more than learning centers, they were incubators of hope and resilience. where the next generation learned not just arithmetic and grammar, but the values of community, mutual support, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Even beyond formal education, Greenwood cultivated spaces that reinforced its economic and cultural vitality. Newspapers like the Tulsa Star became lifelines of information and advocacy, informing residents about local news, encouraging civic engagement, and amplifying the voices of those who were otherwise marginalized. Through these publications, the community could organize, celebrate achievements, and confront challenges with clarity and unity, knowing that the stories told in their own words could counter the distorted narratives circulating outside Greenwood. Theaters, too, were integral to this ecosystem, offering a place for entertainment, social connection, and cultural affirmation. The Dreamland Theater, for instance, provided families with the chance to experience art and performance in a space where they felt seen, respected, and valued, a rare luxury in a country still grappling with segregation and discrimination. Churches served as more than spiritual centers. They were the heartbeats of Greenwood, hosting town meetings, social gatherings, and charitable initiatives, and offering guidance and support in times of need. Pastors acted as community leaders, mediators, and advocates, ensuring that the social fabric remained intact even as external pressures threatened to unravel it. In every way, Greenwood demonstrated that prosperity was inseparable from solidarity. The community's success relied not on individual wealth alone, but on a shared commitment to uplift one another and protect what had been built. Money in Greenwood did not simply change hands, it circulated thoughtfully within the community, reinforcing a cycle of investment and growth that was rare in Black communities at the time. Local markets, service providers, and enterprises all kept resources close to home, ensuring that families could rely on their neighbors for goods, services, and mutual support. This circulation of wealth strengthened social bonds, reinforced accountability, and created a tangible sense of security, showing the transformative power of collective economic agency. Families could go about their daily lives, confident that their hard-earned dollars were fostering not only their own prosperity, but also the broader resilience of their community. But the story of Greenwood's flourishing economy is inseparable from the broader context of systemic adversity that made such success both remarkable and fragile. Despite the visible accomplishments and vibrant life within the district, the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma enforced strict segregation laws, ensuring that Black residents remained confined to certain areas and systematically denied opportunities elsewhere. Greenwood's economic independence was, therefore, both a triumph and an act of quiet defiance, a statement that Black Americans could create, sustain, and govern thriving institutions even when denied recognition, protection, or support from the wider society. The contrast between Greenwood's self-sufficiency and the neglect it faced outside its borders was stark. While city services were often slow or absent, roads were poorly maintained, and municipal support scarce, the community relied on its own resourcefulness, ingenuity, and solidarity. Residents repaired what they could, innovated when necessary, and leaned on each other in ways that reinforced not just survival, but thriving. The success of Greenwood was not the product of external aid, but of internal cohesion, trust, and an unwavering belief that the future could be shaped through determination, collaboration, and self-reliance. In many, Greenwood was more than a neighborhood, it was a beacon of what could be achieved when a marginalized community was allowed to exercise agency and invest in its own people. Every business, school, theater, and church told a story of ambition, creativity, and resilience. Each brick laid, each shop opened, and each classroom filled was a testament to the commitment of people who refused to be defined by oppression. It was a living example of empowerment, illustrating that economic success and social cohesion are deeply intertwined, and that prosperity can flourish even amid systemic adversity. Greenwood's story, rich with achievement and innovation, reminds us that progress is not simply about wealth, but about creating networks of opportunity, cultivating pride, and building institutions that endure. It is a story that teaches us the power of community-driven development, the importance of education and cultural affirmation, and the resilience that emerges when people come together to protect and nurture what they have built. As we continue to explore the legacy of Greenwood, we see not only the heights it achieved, but the vulnerabilities that would later test its strength, making its history both inspiring and profoundly instructive for generations who strive to understand the complexities of success, justice, and human determination. Despite the remarkable achievements and undeniable vibrancy of Greenwood, its very existence became a source of tension that simmered just beneath the surface, a tension that would eventually erupt into tragedy. The success and visibility of the district did not go unnoticed by surrounding communities, many of whom viewed Greenwood's prosperity with suspicion, envy, and outright hostility. For decades, systemic barriers and discriminatory practices had reinforced the notion that Black Americans should remain confined to a subordinate social and economic status. Yet Greenwood's thriving businesses, well-maintained homes, schools, theaters, and churches challenged this deeply entrenched hierarchy in a manner impossible to ignore. Its residents had built something extraordinary with their own hands, nurturing a community where economic independence, cultural affirmation, and social cohesion flourished. And while this achievement was a source of pride internally, it inadvertently inflamed resentment externally. Segregation laws, long a tool for maintaining racial inequality, framed the boundaries within which Greenwood existed. While these laws ostensibly dictated where Black citizens could live, work, and socialize, they also fostered a climate in which white residents could rationalize hostility toward a community that was simultaneously visible and successful. The mere act of prosperity was construed as a provocation, as if economic self-sufficiency violated an unspoken social order. City ordinances, banking policies, and municipal neglect all reinforced these divisions. And though Greenwood's inhabitants navigated these barriers with remarkable ingenuity, the underlying structural inequities ensured that envy and prejudice would continue to fester. Propaganda and public rhetoric further amplified these tensions. Local newspapers and word-of-mouth narratives often framed Greenwood not as a symbol of resilience and achievement, but as a threat to the social hierarchy. Stories exaggerated minor disputes, inflamed perceptions of competition, and depicted the thriving Black community in ways designed to incite fear and resentment. This narrative worked subtly yet powerfully, seeding the idea that Greenwood's success was illegitimate, that its residents were overstepping societal boundaries, and that something had to be done to restore the natural order of the city, even as Greenwood's citizens continued their daily lives. Attending schools, opening new businesses, and maintaining cultural institutions, they were increasingly aware that their very visibility made them targets for animosity that could at any moment manifest violently. Economic competition only intensified these resentments. White business owners in Tulsa, already navigating their own struggles in a changing economy, could not easily accept that Greenwood's circulation of wealth created an independent marketplace where dollars remained within the Black community. While this internal economy was a cornerstone of Greenwood's success, allowing families to reinvest in their own neighborhoods. It also provoked jealousy from neighboring white districts where resources flowed outward rather than circulating locally. The prosperity of Greenwood highlighted disparities in income, opportunity, and social mobility in stark relief, and the tension this caused was compounded by an absence of constructive channels for dialogue or reconciliation. Underlying all of these forces was a broader cultural climate that normalized racial fear and hostility. Decades of entrenched prejudice, reinforced by legal, economic, and social systems, had created an environment where resentment could quickly escalate into aggression. In Greenwood, the community's confidence and achievements were viewed not merely as success, but as defiance, as an implicit challenge to a society structured to suppress black advancement. Every new business opening, every well-tended street, and every cultural event was a visible reminder of what could be achieved when barriers were navigated with courage and skill. And for some outside observers, such visibility was intolerable. Even as residents pursued daily life with energy and determination, enjoying the fruits of their labor and the strength of their community. They lived with the quiet awareness that their accomplishments had made them vulnerable. Rumors, minor confrontations, and the constant scrutiny of external observers contributed to a growing tension that pulsed through the streets like an unacknowledged current. Subtle yet omnipresent, people inside Greenwood understood the stakes. Their success was not just personal but collective, a delicate ecosystem of interdependent businesses, schools, churches, and cultural institutions, and any attack on this fabric could ripple outward with devastating consequences. This mounting resentment was exacerbated by incidents of personal conflict, often magnified by racial bias, which fueled perceptions of threat and injustice. Stories of minor disputes were twisted into symbols of alleged disorder, lending credibility to the belief that Greenwood needed to be checked or punished. These narratives, propagated in public spaces, reinforced stereotypes while ignoring the real achievements of the community. What began as envy and suspicion thus transformed into a combustible mix of prejudice, fear, and hostility, a social tinderbox waiting for a spark. The dynamics at play in Greenwood illustrate a paradox inherent to marginalized communities striving for independence. The very success that should be celebrated becomes a flashpoint for external resentment. Greenwood's prosperity was both a triumph and a provocation, a testament to human ingenuity under oppressive circumstances, and yet also a reminder to the broader society of what had been denied to Black Americans for generations. The community's flourishing schools, newspapers, theaters, churches, and businesses stood as symbols of achievement and resilience. Yet to outsiders conditioned by systemic racism, they were markers of disruption and defiance. Ultimately, the story of Greenwood's rising tension is a story about the fragility of progress in a society structured to resist equality. It is about how visibility and success, when achieved by those historically denied opportunity, can provoke fear and hostility in ways that are both social and systemic. The thriving Black community, while a beacon of independence and self-sufficiency, became entangled in a network of envy, prejudice, and resentment that laid the groundwork for future conflict. Greenwood's experience demonstrates that while economic achievement and cultural vitality can inspire, they can also incite, revealing the complex interplay between community success and societal hostility. As we reflect on this period, the narrative serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked prejudice, the power of perception, and the resilience required to navigate a world that celebrates some success stories while attempting to suppress others. The tension that had quietly suffused Greenwood erupted with a sudden, horrifying ferocity, sparked by an incident whose details would be twisted and amplified in the collective consciousness of Tulsa. A confrontation involving a black teenager and a white resident ordinary enough in its individual circumstances was transformed into a catalyst for violence. A pretext for unleashing years of pent-up resentment, envy, and racial hostility. What followed was not merely a riot or a street fight, but a coordinated and catastrophic assault on an entire community. A moment when prejudice and power combined to destroy the fruits of decades of labor, ingenuity, and pride. In the early hours of that fateful day, Greenwood's streets, which had once echoed with the sounds of children playing, shopkeepers calling out the day as specials, and the steady hum of commerce, were invaded by a white mob whose numbers and ferocity overwhelmed any semblance of protection. Law enforcement, whose role should have been to maintain peace, was complicit, whether through direct assistance, willful inaction, or a tacit endorsement of the violence. Some even took to the skies, using planes to harass and intimidate residents from above, an almost surreal and terrifying display of aerial dominance that underscored the imbalance of power. The destruction was immediate and devastating. Greenwood, a community meticulously built over years of labor, dreams, and determination, was reduced to ashes and rubble. Over 1,000 homes and businesses were burned, looted, or otherwise annihilated, leaving entire families without shelter and erasing the economic and cultural infrastructure that had sustained the district. Schools, churches, newspapers, and theaters, symbols of Greenwood's independence and its residents' unwavering commitment to progress, were demolished, their absence creating a void that extended far beyond the physical destruction. Families who had spent generations accumulating wealth, securing education, and nurturing a self-reliant society found themselves stripped of the security and pride they had painstakingly built, forced into temporary shelters or the homes of distant relatives, uncertain when or if they could ever return to the life they once knew. The human cost of the assault was staggering. Hundreds of lives were lost, with many more injured, and countless others left traumatized by the sheer violence of what they witnessed. Families were torn apart. Neighbors vanished, and the community's tight-knit social fabric, which had been Greenwood's greatest strength, was violently shredded in a matter of hours. Survivors endured not only the immediate horrors of destruction and loss, but also the psychological weight of knowing that the wider society, including the legal system, would offer little in the way of justice. Eyewitnesses recounted harrowing scenes of smoke rising from burning buildings, of desperate attempts to save what little could be salvaged, and of the cries of children and elders amidst chaos, all while mobs moved through the streets with a devastating sense of impunity. As the smoke cleared and the immediate threat subsided, the aftermath revealed a grim reality. Greenwood's residents, already grappling with loss and grief, faced the bitter truth that no meaningful legal or financial redress awaited them. Courts dismissed claims, insurance companies refused to honor policies, and municipal authorities largely ignored the pleas for compensation or support. The systemic indifference compounded the trauma, signaling to survivors that their suffering was not only a consequence of mob violence, but also a reflection of a society structured to devalue their lives and erode their agency. The resilience that had once been Greenwood's hallmark was now tested in ways that no individual or community could fully anticipate. Families who had built thriving businesses, who had celebrated achievements in education and culture, were suddenly confronted with the reality of displacement, poverty, and societal neglect. In the weeks, months, and years that followed, Greenwood's landscape, both physical and social, was irrevocably altered. Streets once lined with flourishing enterprises became vacant lots, the laughter of children replaced by silence, and the vibrant hum of community life supplanted by an eerie void. Yet, even amid devastation, the spirit of Greenwood's residents endured. Survivors clung to the memory of what had been, drawing strength from the cultural and social bonds that had sustained them prior to the catastrophe. Families sought to rebuild, to reclaim fragments of their former lives. But the magnitude of loss and the lack of external support made the path forward daunting and fraught with obstacles. The assault on Greenwood stands as a stark illustration of how systemic prejudice, when combined with mob mentality and institutional complicity, can obliterate a community's achievements in a single catastrophic episode. It highlights the precariousness of progress in an environment where racial animosity is entrenched, and where the successes of marginalized communities are perceived not as triumphs to celebrate, but as provocations to punish. Greenwood's experience underscores the resilience, courage, and determination of its residents, who, despite unimaginable loss, remained committed to preserving the legacy of their community and the memory of their accomplishments. It also serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of unchecked hatred, the fragility of social equity, and the enduring impact of violence on generations. As we reflect on this tragic chapter in history, it becomes clear that Greenwood's story is not merely one of destruction, but also of endurance, an enduring testament to the strength and tenacity of a community that refused to be erased, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. In the wake of the devastating assault on Greenwood, a deeper, more insidious battle emerged, not fought with fire or weapons, but with silence, omission, and the deliberate shaping of collective memory, as the physical smoke of the massacre lingered over Tulsa. City officials, local newspapers, and even schools began a concerted effort to suppress the truth of what had occurred, reshaping the narrative so that the horrors endured by Greenwood's residents would fade from public consciousness. Reports that might have exposed the scale of the violence were minimized or buried. Photographs capturing the devastation were rarely published, and the stories of survivors were often dismissed, discredited, or simply ignored. What had been a flourishing, vibrant community, whose achievements and culture had once commanded recognition and admiration, became, in the public narrative, little more than a footnote or an uncomfortable memory to be left unexamined. Survivors, already grappling with profound loss and trauma, found themselves subjected to an additional layer of adversity. Intimidation, social ostracism, and systemic obstruction became tools to enforce silence, making it clear that any attempt to publicly reclaim Greenwood's story could be met with repercussions, both subtle and overt. Families who had once celebrated accomplishments, who had nurtured children to excel in education and business, were suddenly forced into quiet endurance, their voices stifled by a society unwilling to confront its own failings. Children growing up in Tulsa were largely taught a version of history that omitted the massacre entirely. Classrooms did not acknowledge the fiery destruction of Greenwood, nor the lives lost or disrupted in its wake. The richness of Greenwood's cultural and economic life, once a beacon of Black achievement and resilience, was excised from textbooks and local law, leaving generations of Tulsans unaware of a community that had once flourished in their own city. This systematic erasure was not merely a local phenomenon but resonated nationally, reflecting broader societal tendencies to ignore or distort histories that challenged prevailing narratives about race, success, and social order. Greenwood's story, when mentioned at all in national discourse, was often reduced to vague references or mischaracterizations, depriving the wider public of a nuanced understanding of both the community's triumphs and the tragedy it endured. Decades passed before meaningful acknowledgement began to emerge. Scholars, journalists, and activists had to painstakingly piece together accounts, comb through archival materials, and interview survivors to reconstruct a history that official channels had deliberately obscured. Each recovered detail, each verified testimony, became an act of reclamation, a small victory against the weight of systemic suppression. The psychological and cultural impact of this silence extended far beyond the immediate generation of Greenwood survivors. Families internalized a cautious approach to public discourse, wary of drawing attention to themselves or their communities, and children absorbed a fragmented sense of identity, unaware of the accomplishments and struggles of their ancestors. The erasure of Greenwood from local memory functioned as a subtle but powerful tool of control, shaping societal perceptions of race, success, and belonging, and reinforcing barriers to understanding, empathy, and justice. Meanwhile, the physical reconstruction of Greenwood, though pursued with determination, could not fully restore what had been lost. Homes could be rebuilt, businesses reopened, but the intangible history, the pride, and the stories of achievement had been partially obscured, buried under decades of selective remembrance. It was not until civil rights movements gained momentum in the latter half of the 20th century that attention gradually returned to Greenwood, fueled by a growing recognition that silenced histories could not remain hidden forever. Scholars and journalists began to revisit the events with rigorous inquiry, interviewing survivors and descendants, uncovering primary documents, and challenging the sanitized accounts that had dominated official records. National media eventually began to acknowledge Greenwood, not simply as a tragic episode of racial violence, but as a testament to resilience, ambition, and the indomitable spirit of its residents. Even then, full recognition was slow, and the scars, both literal and psychological, remained deeply etched in the fabric of the community. The suppression of Greenwood's history serves as a sobering reminder of the power of narrative control and the dangers of allowing injustice to be concealed under the guise of public forgetfulness. It underscores the importance of truth-telling, of preserving and honoring the stories of marginalized communities, and of confronting uncomfortable realities to foster a more equitable and informed society. Greenwood's story, once hidden and denied, now emerges as a symbol of endurance, illustrating not only the profound harm caused by violence and systemic erasure, but also the capacity for memory, resilience, and reclamation to withstand decades of intentional silence. It is a history that demands recognition, reflection, and engagement, reminding us that acknowledging past wrongs is essential not only to honor those who lived them, but to educate future generations and to ensure that such tragedies are neither forgotten nor repeated. As we remember Greenwood today, it is vital to celebrate the courage of its residents who persisted despite overwhelming odds, and to honor the legacy they fought to preserve. Sharing this story, listening to survivors' voices, and keeping the memory of Greenwood alive in public consciousness is an act of respect, of education, and of justice. By confronting the truths long suppressed, society can move toward understanding and reconciliation, ensuring that Greenwood's history is neither erased nor forgotten. If you find value in learning and spreading these stories, consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing Greenwood's legacy with others. Because remembering is the first step toward a more informed and compassionate world. Even after the smoke cleared and the ashes of Greenwood were swept away, the spirit of the community refused to be extinguished. Residents returned with determination, clearing rubble by hand, salvaging what they could, and beginning the painstaking process of rebuilding their homes, businesses, and lives. Streets that had once thrived with commerce and culture slowly re-emerged with the hum of activity. Though the scars of violence lingered in every corner, families worked tirelessly, often pooling resources and supporting one another, striving to restore a semblance of the self-reliant and prosperous community that had been so violently disrupted. Yet, despite these heroic efforts, the economic disparities that followed were stark and enduring. Many were unable to reclaim the wealth, property, or opportunities they had once held, and the promise of Greenwood's full recovery remained only partially realized. This reconstruction, however, was never simply about buildings or businesses. It was a testament to resilience, a quiet assertion that the legacy of Greenwood could not be obliterated by hatred or systemic oppression. Children were raised with stories of courage and endurance, even when formal education largely ignored the massacre. These narratives passed down through families and oral histories became the lifeblood of Greenwood's identity, ensuring that while the official record might have suppressed the past, the memory lived on in the hearts of those who experienced it firsthand. Scholars and historians eventually joined in the effort, meticulously piecing together fragmented accounts, poring over archival materials, and reconstructing a fuller picture of Greenwood's vibrancy before and after the massacre. Every photograph recovered, every newspaper article re-examined, and every survivor testimony recorded served as a reclamation of history, countering decades of erasure and deliberate silence. The fight for recognition and justice did not stop at historical documentation. Descendants of Greenwood residents and activists pressed for reparations, for acknowledgement from the city and the nation, and for the preservation of Black history in educational curricula. They argued that memory itself was a form of justice, and that without confronting the realities of Greenwood, society risked repeating the very patterns of discrimination and violence that had devastated the community. Museums, memorials, and educational programs were eventually established, not only to honor those who had suffered, but to illuminate the richness of Greenwood's culture, commerce, and community life. These efforts transformed Greenwood from a hidden tragedy into a symbol of perseverance, illustrating the importance of reclaiming and safeguarding history that has long been threatened by neglect and oppression. At the same time, the story of Greenwood resonates far beyond the streets of Tulsa. It highlights the broader struggles of African American communities in the early 20th century and the resilience required to navigate systemic inequality, violence, and social exclusion. Greenwood serves as a reminder that economic independence and cultural self-determination are not simply markers of prosperity. They are acts of defiance, asserting dignity and human value in the face of attempts to suppress both. The lessons embedded in Greenwood's legacy are not only historical, they are deeply relevant to contemporary conversations about racial justice, equity, and the importance of amplifying marginalized voices. By understanding Greenwood, society gains insight into both the dangers of unchecked prejudice and the power of community solidarity to endure and resist. Remembering Greenwood also underscores the human capacity for hope. Amidst loss, displacement, and trauma, the community's members demonstrated extraordinary courage, creativity, and perseverance. They nurtured schools, businesses, churches, and cultural institutions that offered stability and pride to their children. And in doing so, they created a blueprint for future generations on how to survive and thrive despite systemic obstacles. Their achievements, while too often overshadowed by tragedy, speak to a universal truth: that human dignity and resilience cannot be erased. Even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the story of Greenwood invites reflection, encouraging each of us to consider how history shapes present realities, and how collective memory can serve as a catalyst for justice, healing, and social progress. As we conclude this narrative, it is vital to recognize that the work of remembering Greenwood is ongoing. Descendants, scholars, and communities continue to fight for full acknowledgement and reparative justice, while educators and institutions strive to ensure that Greenwood's story is told accurately and widely. Preserving this history is essential not only to honor those who lived and suffered, but to educate future generations about the costs of injustice and the strength of human resilience. By engaging with Greenwood's legacy, sharing its story, and committing to remembrance, we participate in a broader movement toward equity, understanding, and societal transformation. Thank you for taking the time to explore the story of Greenwood with us. By learning about its past and sharing it with others, you help ensure that the legacy of courage, community, and resilience endures. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with others so that more people can learn about Greenwood, its history, and the lessons it carries for all of us. Together, we can honor those who came before, amplify voices that were silenced, and build a future where stories like Greenwood are never forgotten.